Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in our 2026 CLMP training. For some of you, this might be your first training. For others, you might have been taking it before, and this is a refresher for you. Either way, we're happy to have you here. My name is Tamara Lipsey. I'll be presenting the chlorophyll monitoring, and then later this afternoon, I will help Eric with the DO and temperature meter monitoring presentation. But I also have the privilege of welcoming you all to the training. I am an aquatic biologist with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Eagle funds MiCorps, and so I am the program lead person for Eagle. But I'm also, like I said, an aquatic biologist. I do a lot of the lake sampling that you guys will all learn about today. I also do stream sampling for macroinvertebrates and habitat. And I really have enjoyed the 23 years I've been at Eagle. So I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about how MiCorps and the CLMP program came about. MiCorps is the shortened phrase for Michigan Clean Water Corps, which was created under a state of Michigan executive order. It was created to assist Eagle in collecting lake and stream water quality data to help in Eagle's mission of protecting our water resources. And it allows the public a way to participate in this shared mission. The MiCorps program has three programs under its umbrella. The first is that Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program that you're all here to learn about today. And then we also have a volunteer stream monitoring program and a volunteer stream cleanup program. A little bit first about how the MiCorps program is funded and operated. As I noted earlier, MiCorps is sponsored through Eagle. The funding source is Michigan Renew funds and also water quality license plate funds. But because it's such a big program and one person couldn't do it all, we have a fantastic team of people led by Michigan State University. We just started a new 5-year contract, but we also, MSU partners with the Huron River Watershed Council and the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association. This partnership is unique and it works well because we have a state agency, a state university, a watershed group, and a statewide nonprofit all working together. And we find that that partnership really works out for the people who participate in MiCorps. And it takes a whole army of people to make MiCorps run smoothly. This is our team of people. In a minute, you're going to meet Joe Latimore, who's the director of the MiCorps program. And she and Paul Steen have been with the program since the beginning, and their experience and leadership is greatly appreciated. Paul works for the Huron River Watershed Council, and he's the stream program manager, which I'll tell you about in just a little bit. Erick Elgin is our Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program Manager, and Kate Laramie, who is also with Huron River Watershed Council, is new staff. She just came on this contract, and she's helping Eric with the CLMP program. Another new person is Sarah Holmes. She's our new administrator for the CLMP program. For those of you who have participated in the program before, she is taking over the position of Jean Roth. Sarah's worked for MSU for many years, administering grants, and she and her husband are very supportive of protecting our water resources. She's slowly learning the ins and outs of the program, and in the future will be your go-to for all questions related to CLMP, along with Eric and Kate. We also have Chelsea Cooper, who she's the face behind all of our awesome social media accounts. We have over 1,000 followers on Facebook and Instagram. So if you use these platforms, I encourage you to check us out. And last but not least is Melissa DeSimone, who's the executive director for the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association. And MLSA has also been a partner of MiCorps since the beginning, and they are our connection to the thousands of riparian property owners across the state. So, a little bit more about our stream programs. Our volunteer stream cleanup program um, is under the MiCorps umbrella, but it is a grant program. So, the purpose of it is to give out grants to units of government so that they can remove trash from our water and along the riparian area. It is funded through these license plate funds that we get. So if you buy one of these, which I just did last year for my birthday, um, a portion of the profits will go to this program. As I noted earlier, Dr. Paul Steen is our program manager. The grant awards for 2026 will be coming out very soon. Every year, the proposals come out usually in January, February, and are usually due early March. And we have a total of $25,000 that goes out to this program. Our other stream program is the volunteer stream monitoring program. So instead of cleanup, we give out grants for stream monitoring. This is like a train the trainer kind of program. So we provide grants and training and leadership to get volunteer monitoring groups started. And then they train their own volunteers and continue the program. And as part of this program, they collect both macroinvertebrate and habitat data. Again, the awards announcement should be coming out, I think, this week. And every year, again, in January and February, we have a request for proposals for three types of grants. So if you are interested or run some kind of watershed monitoring group, I encourage you to check it out. But today we're, of course, focusing on our Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, and we're proud to say that we have been collecting data for decades, and all of that data is available online to anyone who has access to the internet. We're the second oldest volunteer monitoring program in the country. And the data is used not only locally to make land and watershed management decisions, but it's also used by researchers both within Michigan and across the country. And it's used by state agencies like the Michigan DNR and, of course, Eagle. In 2025, we had a record number of lakes participating. This is a list of all the parameters that can be sampled as part of CLMP, and you'll be having training on all of these except the aquatic plant mapping today. With all these parameters being sampled, the MiCorps program ends up submitting so much information to Eagle every year. And in addition to the data being collected every year, it's being collected throughout the year. So if I go out with another biologist and do some sampling, we're likely to only sample once during the summer, usually late summer. But we have, as part of the MiCorps program, numerous lakes who are collecting data all year round or all season long, so May through September, and they've been collecting data year after year, sometimes for decades. So soon, the 2026 integrated report, which is part of the requirements Eagle has for the Clean Water Act, will be submitting data to EPA. And thanks to MiCorps, the 2026 report includes 318 lakes Eagle is assessing. So we're using the MiCorps data to say what the quality of that lake is and then putting it in the report. And this is 318 lakes we would not have been able to report on if the MiCorps program did not exist. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to finish up our introduction.
Thanks, Tamara, for that great introduction and overview of the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. As you mentioned, I'm Joe Latimore, and I am the director of the MiCorps program. I'm also a faculty member at Michigan State University in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, where I work on a lot of different lake and stream protection and conservation efforts, including a lot of aquatic invasive species work and leadership development for folks who live around lakes and rivers. And so I like to spend as much time on lakes as I can, or in them, as you can see on some of those photos too, and talking with people about all the fascinating aspects of lake life. Next slide, please. So there's just a couple of details about the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program that I wanted to share with you this morning. And one of them is that there are 2 steps to CLMP participation. There's training and there's enrollment. You're in training right now, so you're taking care of that. But just attending a training does not mean you are an official CLMP volunteer. To become a CLMP volunteer, you have to enroll on our website. And there's a great step-by-step process that leads you through that. Just look for becoming a volunteer under lakes on our MiCorps website, and you will find the steps on how to do that. The first thing, if you're brand new to the program, the first thing that you'll want to do is set up an account for yourself. Just like if you're going to Amazon for the first time or any online store, they're going to ask you to set up a profile. What's your name? What's your contact information? Those kinds of things. So you'll need to do that. And then once you've done that, you can add a lake to your profile. And at that point, you're just going to pick your lake, click on it, and then we'll have your name associated with that lake. And then the next step will be doing enrollment, where you actually, the lead volunteer on each lake will actually select what parameters, all those parameters we're going to go over with you today, which parameters you want to do this year, select those and pay the small enrollment fees associated with each of those. And so training and enrollment, it's important to just make a distinction about those 2 requirements. So I wanted to emphasize that today. Next slide. We get a lot of questions about where are all these data that Tamara talked about, all the data that volunteers like you are collecting on Michigan lakes all year round. And those are all searchable and findable on our website, micorps.net. You simply, on their very homepage, you'll find lake and stream data. Indicated by that red arrow there, you click on that and you'll have a choice to view data, enter data, or look at summary reports of the data. The screen that I show at the bottom of the slide is what you'll see after you do a search under the View Data choice. You can search by watershed, by lake name, and find out, and you can choose what parameter you're interested in. Maybe you just want to look at the phosphorus data for a lake. So you can put in this example, the lake name Angela, and you'll find out what data are available for that lake. And you can see there too, you can also even download those data into a spreadsheet so you can play around with them on your own computer if you want to do that. And so we encourage you to explore the data, both for your lake, for other lakes you might be interested in. Maybe you feel competitive with the lake down the road. You want to see how they're holding up compared to your lake and so forth. It's really interesting, great resources for you. So don't forget, all of those data are available to anyone. You don't have to sign in. You don't have to enroll. Anyone can go and explore those data. Next slide. You can also enter your data, and we strongly encourage every volunteer when you're doing your monitoring throughout the season to regularly go in and enter your latest data into the database, because the sooner it gets entered, the sooner it's available and saved within our secure server. So it's going to be there and not lost. If you lose a data sheet or something like that, if you manage to enter it before that, you'll know it'll be safe in there. So if you are an enrolled volunteer, you can enter data for your lake. You just go in, enter a new sample, choose which parameter you'll be entering data for, and it will walk you through a form where you enter the data that you wrote down on your data sheet. Next slide. We took a look at the amount of data that our volunteers entered back in 2024 after the 2024 season, so in the fall of that year, because we were interested to know how much of our data were being entered by the volunteers and how much of it we had to enter as your MiCorps staff. And here's what we found. We found for SECI, that first bar there, SECI transparency data, the volunteers did an outstanding job that year. 88% of the lakes entering data or collecting SECI data entered it themselves. And that is outstanding because the more volunteers enter data, the more quickly we can get all of the year's data into the database. And we need to have all of the data into the database before we can wrap up the season and put together the summary reports that we send each lake every year. And so if volunteers are kind of slacking off and not entering their data, then it all lands on our desk. And we're a small team, and for none of us is this our full-time job. It's a part of each of our job. And so we work as fast as we can to get that data in, but volunteer help is incredibly valuable to us. It speeds the whole process along. And then you won't feel like, hey, where's my report? It's been months, I haven't seen it yet, because we have to get everything in before we can generate those reports. So as you can see, although the volunteers after the 2024 season did a great job, 88% entered their own SECI data, the numbers were a lot lower for phosphorus, for chlorophyll, for the exotic plant watch. But it was great for dissolved oxygen and Score the Shore. So we first presented this slide at the training last year and really encourage volunteers to enter their own data. So did people take my advice and enter their data? Next slide, please. For the most part, yes, we did see an improvement, even though fewer volunteers in 2025, the panel on your right, entered their data. We dropped from 88% to 77%. For just about every other category, a lot more volunteers jumped on the bandwagon and entered their own data, especially for dissolved oxygen. 90% of our volunteers entered their data. So appreciation to all of you who were involved last year and entered your data online. You can imagine the amount of time and effort it takes for us to enter the data by hand ourselves for over 300 lakes. So thank you, and I hope that most of you will help us out and enter your data as you go this summer as well. Next slide. It's important that you realize that all of the stuff we're going to talk about today is available on our website. There are fact sheets about each CLMP parameter. Everything we're going to talk about today, we have a one-page fact sheet that explains why. Why do we collect this data? What does it mean? What can it tell you about your lake? These can be really informative for you as a volunteer, but also something that you could share with your lake association, your community, your neighbors. If they ask you, why are you doing this? What's the point? You can just hand them that sheet and they'll have all the answers to their questions. On the website too, you'll find all the instructions, the protocols we're going to go over today that you can print out or review at any time. The data forms you need are there that you can print out and make copies of for your use. You'll find the schedules for parameters like phosphorus and chlorophyll need to be collected at certain times of year based on what county your lake is in. So you'll find all those schedules on the website. You'll also find those summary data reports as well as the raw data, which I just went over a minute ago. And finally, there's a nice set of training videos that are mostly recent additions to our website that not only are recordings of these trainings, but also, like you see in the picture, actual field videos that we created of the protocol. So you can see what it looks like on the water to do the work that you're signing up to do. Next slide. We're excited to share that we recently redesigned our website to make it much easier for folks to find things that they're looking for and to make it much more modern. So at micorps.net, here's the homepage. Again, you can find panels that will take you to lake monitoring, stream monitoring, the stream cleanups that Tamara talked about, and then, of course, lake and stream data. Next slide. If you click on lake monitoring, here's what you will see. Again, remember I mentioned become a volunteer. That's where you click if you have not already enrolled in the CLMP. That will explain to you the process. You can click on monitoring parameters to see each of the parameters we're going to talk about today. There's a link to find out about training opportunities. And of course, we want to make sure it's easy to find the data. If you click on monitoring parameters, next slide, please. This is what you'll see. And this is probably the piece of the website that I'm most excited about. We have a separate page for each of our parameters. So if you need information about Secchi Disc, for example, you can click on that Secchi Disc panel and it will provide you everything you may need to be a successful volunteer. We've got the protocols, the videos, the data sheets, the schedules, everything you need for Secchi Disc is on one page, very easy to find. And the same is true for all of the other parameters as you can see here. You just click on the one that you're interested in and everything, you'll find a one-stop shop for information about that parameter and that parameter only. Next slide. CLMP stands for the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. And so our focus today and generally with this program is on monitoring. Today we're going to be talking and training you how to do monitoring, how to collect data on your lake. Monitoring can help inform lake management. Of course, the two go hand in hand, and that's the motivation for most people in the program to get involved. They want to protect and manage their lake appropriately, and they want to have data to inform their management decisions. However, we've got a lot to cover today, and so we're going to request that you keep your questions focused on monitoring. We don't have the time to address lake management questions today, so we appreciate your cooperation on that. We are here for you to help you understand your data, how you may apply it to management, but that's not what we're doing today. So feel free to follow up with us at any time after today if you have questions about lake management or what your data mean. But today we're going to focus on getting you trained so you're collecting those data the best possible way. Next slide. One last thing I want to draw your attention to is an opportunity that we're really excited about that we're not going to talk about in depth today, but it's another way that volunteers at MiCorps and even anyone across Michigan can get involved with reporting and tracking aquatic invasive species in Michigan. We are working with the iNaturalist app to offer a Detection Blitz event between June 29th and July 12th this summer. Anyone can use the iNaturalist app to take pictures of potential or known aquatic invasive species anywhere in Michigan. And this can be plants, animals like crayfish or zebra mussels, plants up on shore like Phragmites or purple loosestrife, and plants in the water, for example, that we're going to talk about with the Exotic Plant Watch today. So we'll put a link in the chat on how you can get signed up for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We did it last year and over 100 people participated and shared information and photos. It really helps us get a handle statewide on what's going on with aquatic invasive species. So we'll share that information. It's all on our website again to get you signed up or help you share that information out with others or organizations in your area who you think might have fun with that. All right, at this time, we're going to hand it over once again, this time to my colleague Erick Elgin, who's going to give a really brief introduction to lake monitoring.
Joe, before you jump off, I answered it in the chat, but if you'd just like to add a little bit more. Somebody had a question about how do people add phosphorus and chlorophyll before the data comes in? How can they enter the data? And what is it that they enter?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So when you go out and collect phosphorus or chlorophyll samples, you have a data sheet. And on that data sheet, you're going to write things like, what was the date and time? Who collected the samples? What were the conditions when you went out sampling and so forth? That's all data that you can enter right away, even without results from the lab. So once you are done out in the field, you've collected your bottles of water for that day, you can immediately go in and enter the data off your data sheet into our website. And once that's there, when we get the data result from your bottle, from the laboratory, we can add that result. That's the process, that's how it works. And in fact, we have to have the data off your data sheet in our database before we can add the laboratory's result. And so absolutely, there are data that you can enter even though it's not the analytical result from the lab. We'll add that. You can add everything else.
Perfect. Thank you. And that certainly is helpful. So as Joe mentioned, I'm going to be covering the very basic 101 of lake monitoring and kind of putting the day into perspective. My name is Erick Elgin. I am an aquatic ecologist with Michigan State University Extension, and I work statewide on the conservation of our inland lakes. So I help with monitoring with the CLMP as I'm the Lake Program Manager. You'll be receiving a lot of communications from me, and I'm always here to help um, with your monitoring needs and your lake needs. And I also do a lot of other things from natural shorelines to aquatic plant conservation and management and kind of everything in between. And so I look forward to getting to know all of you and to work with all of you on collecting some awesome data on your lake. Next slide, please. So lakes are incredibly complex. Um, Oftentimes, like why is a lake the way it is, isn't because of just one or two things. Instead, it's a mix of different components from wave action, from the amount of light, from the shape of your lake, influencing a more chemical environment, like how much dissolved oxygen is present, what kind of nutrients are there, what other kind of dissolved chemicals are in the water. And then those two components also interplay and mix with the biological. And so, what type of fish are there? Are there certain species of zooplankton and what can they do? And different phytoplankton and algae. And so that together is why we see what we see in a lake. And so next slide, please. Oh, can other people still see the slide deck?
No, the slide share went away, but so did Tamara. I think she might be
Oh,
having an internet issue. So would you
no,
like me to share my screen
I
instead?
actually have it up too, so
Okay.
I'll I'll get that rolling.
All right.
We hope Tamara's doing well.
Just probably an internet glitch.
Yep.
I'm back, but I'm gonna hardwire myself into the internet.
Thank you, Tamara. We're happy you're safe. Joe, can you see the slideshow?
Looking good.
Thank you. Okay, so this kind of comes like a good example of what I mean by that our lake ecosystems are complex is to think about a common thing that we look at on certain lakes is why is my lake green? A common question that we see in certain lakes. And oftentimes it's not just one thing. So for example, why is my lake green can be a combination of there's been a lot of rain, and so there's a lot of runoff. And when there's a lot of runoff, that can have phosphorus and nitrogen, two key nutrients to algal growth. But it also might mean why is my lake green? Is because you have phosphorus that's loading from the coming not from the outside of the lake, but inside of the lake off of the sediments. But that's not all. It's not all about nutrients and why a lake is green. You could have some other components. Changes in the fish community can create what's called a trophic cascade and change the food web that results in more algae. And then the final thing of why a lake is green could also be that your aquatic plant community is changing. If you start to have a reduction in the amount of aquatic plant coverage, there's still there's now still nutrients and light for plant and algae growth. And if there's less plants, there's typically more algae. And so this just describes the complexities of why a lake is a certain way. And of course, lakes aren't just static and they change through time. And here's a graph that I'll just show that illustrates this. So this is a common graph that we make here in lake monitoring, where the graph is flipped upside down. So at 0 feet here, we're at the surface of the lake, represented by this boat here. And then as you go deeper, that's the deeper. So this is 30 feet down into the lake. And then on the top axis here, we are looking at dates. So this is Secchi disk depth. Kate Laramie is in a few minutes going to talk about this. This is where a disk goes into the water until it disappears, essentially. And so this disk disappeared around 25 feet in May and just around 20 feet a little later in May. So you would say, wow, this lake is really clear. But this only gives you a snippet because at this given time in May, there's certain forces acting on a lake and certain activities that are making it this way. And so we look through time in a given year and we notice, oh, boy, May, it's just kind of a weird time, May in 2020. And instead of this very clear lake at 20 or 25 feet, really the typical is just under 15. But usually, like there could be some differences in that. So this is just 1 year of change. How does this look when we look through multiple years? And that's when it reveals a common pattern. And so when we start seeing common patterns like this with our data, this shows the value of long-term data. We're reinforcing something of a pattern and be like, well, why is it the way it is? And so we can expand this even further with some of our lakes have collected 50 plus years of data now. And this is still SecuDisc water transparency. But instead of just through the months, this is now through the years from 1974 to 2023. And each one of these lines is a SecuDisc depth. And we see this pattern of incredibly clear water. If we zoomed in, these incredibly clear water always happens in the springtime. When we see this pattern, we now see a very clear ecological reason, and that is from these little guys. These are called Daphnia, and they filter feed the water of algae, and it creates these clear conditions in the springtime. So the CLMP is a long-term monitoring program, and and that long-term data is to show us these patterns that might exist so we have a sense of what is happening on a given lake. And the big part of long-term data is that it puts the present day into context. If you moved onto a lake, for example, in the last 5 years on this data over here, you'd see, oh no, water clarity is largely declining from around just over 15 feet to now maybe 12 feet or so, 11, 12 feet. And you'd say something must be happening. Well, this is a good trend to find. 5 years of data is wonderful, but when we expand out and are able to take a step out, we see that actually this 5 years is still much more clear than it was in the 70s and 80s. It also, we note that this lake kind of goes in an up and down pattern. And so there may not be a reason to, let's say, panic or reach for an action because an action might not be needed because we do have these kind of ups and downs within a lake, within this particular lake. So it's so wonderful to have this very long-term data to put the present into context. And this also shows the value of the CLMP. We've been going on since 1974, and our protocols remain consistent through time. And this is really valuable because we're comparing apples to apples. How a person collected in 1976 is how we're collecting SecuDisc in 2026. And that is incredible so that we can make these comparisons. And then also we have a lot of data quality checks throughout our protocols, and then also when it comes back to us within our database. And those two things together really create a powerful data set for all of us to understand our lakes. So what does the CLMP do? We are measuring a lake's condition through time. We do this by looking at a couple broad categories. We we collect some water quality parameters like water clarity, phosphorus, algae, also what we call chlorophyll A, and dissolved oxygen temperature. But we also look at shoreline and nearshore habitat with Score the Shore, aquatic plant mapping, and I added dissolved oxygen there too because dissolved oxygen and temperature aren't just a water quality indicator, but a habitat indicator. And then we also look at invasive aquatic plants through the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. And we evaluate these individual lake data and look for trends. And so, for example, let's say it's 2023, your lake received a phosphorus sample of 46 parts per billion. That's good to know because then we do is plot that through time and we can see how your lake is doing. Is your lake stable? Is your lake losing phosphorus or is it increasing in phosphorus? And you can see largely this is pretty stable, but maybe there's kind of a slight uptick here in this lake. And so maybe there's some reasons to pay attention a little bit more and see where the next year's data come in at. But then what else we can do with this data, because we have such a large data set with 300 plus lakes joining every single year about, we can compare that 46 parts per billion to the average lake in our program. And now we can get another perspective in that 46 parts per billion compared to the average concentration in our lakes which is 17. You can say, woo, 46 is quite high. And so now we can use the power of comparing to other lakes. Joe kind of mentioned, you can see like, well, how am I doing compared to other lakes, and make it kind of a competition. That is a great way. It's also a very useful way to know kind of where you're at and what your data means. We also take this data because sometimes numbers on their own, they're great, but we can massage those numbers, put them through an equation, and we can use it to classify our lakes. And so we use the Carlson's Trophic Index to take water transparency data, our phosphorus data, and our chlorophyll data. Chlorophyll, again, is a proxy for algae. And we can combine those and look at them individually to put them through an equation to get us a sense of your lake's trophic status, or how productive, how much life is growing in your lake. So I'll just walk through this fairly quickly and how we put these numbers and then classify your lakes into these bins. So the bin that is low nutrients and therefore lower algal growth is called oligotrophic. So oligotrophic lakes have really clear water. There's just not a lot of nutrients to fuel algae growth. Because there's not a lot of algae growth, we find oxygen up and down the water column throughout the growing season into late summer. So there's still plenty of oxygen on the bottom of these lakes. And typically there's not a lot of plant growth, because if there's not a lot of nutrients in the water, there's typically just not a lot of nutrients in the system as a whole. As we increase our nutrients, we also increase our algal growth. And in these kind of middle ground lakes, we call them mesotrophic. And so when, as I mentioned, more nutrients, more algae, you get less water, lower water clarity. But with that more nutrients, it fuels the food web. So more nutrients mean more algae, which can go up the food web, up the food chain, to allow for you could have very abundant sport fisheries in these sorts of lakes. And then as we increase a little bit more, our higher nutrient loads means more algae, and these are eutrophic waters. These typically have lower water clarity because there's an abundance of algae growing. Because there's an abundance of algae growing, they die as well. So they bloom, they grow a lot, but then when they die, they funnel down to the bottom of the lake, and decomposers use up oxygen as they're decomposing those algae. So we lose oxygen in the bottom part of the lake, called the hypolimnion. And because there's a lot of nutrients in the system, we just have a lot more potential for plant biomass and abundance. This is on a scale. So your lake might be very close to a oligotrophic, mesotrophic, or it could be higher in the oligotrophic, but it's kind of just a moving scale where your lake sits. Once your lake is there, it doesn't mean your lake is always in a given trophic state. Instead, it can become more eutrophic. That's called eutrophication. A lot of lakes are naturally going through this system, or going through this process from low nutrients to higher nutrients, lower algae to more algae, but that takes thousands of years. But there is a component where what we have done on land, have higher residential, putting down fertilizer, more agriculture in our watersheds, that leads to more nutrients and more algal growth in our lakes. And so we call that cultural eutrophication, where a lake is becoming more eutrophic because of us. But a lake may also go the other way, and that's called oligotrophication. So your lake may be mesotrophic and becoming more oligotrophic. So lower nutrients, lower algae. And that can happen through putting in best practices around the shoreline and within the watershed that keep nutrients and sediment on the land. which means less in our lakes. It might also be that you've been invaded by zebra mussels and they filter feed the algae so much that they clear the water of algae and clear the water, which makes your lake more oligotrophic. Lakes can be found naturally in all three categories, and one is not better than the other. They are just different. And so now I'll just finish off my primer on lake monitoring by talking about our other parameters that we can choose from. Our shorelines are an important component of a lake's condition, and our lake shorelines have changed dramatically. Joe is going to talk about Score the Shore a little bit later today, so this is just a quick preview. Just a generation ago, here's a picture from 1938 of a lake in Southwest Michigan. We have some development on there with seasonal cottages, but things have changed dramatically in the preceding decades. And this is what it more looks like today. This high residential development that you see here is not uncommon. This is not a particularly developed lake. This is a very common lake in the southern part of the state. And this can have, as you can imagine, dramatic impacts on the lake. So collecting this sort of data is really important to get that full understanding. Tamara and I will be talking about dissolved oxygen temperature. If you've heard of stratification and a lake turnover or mixing that happens in the spring and fall, this is the parameter for you if you're really curious about understanding that more. And we'll be covering that later this morning, I believe. Nope, this afternoon. And then finally, if you're interested in getting to your invasive plants before they're a problem, once invasive plants become established, it's very difficult to eradicate, if not impossible. And so we have the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, which trains all of you on how to ID the high-risk invasive plants that you can find in your lake. And the idea is that you go out there, find it, and you can manage it and control it before it becomes established around your lake.